das Keyboard steuert ausschließlich Samples an. Ne? Also jede Taste des Keyboards ist mit einem Sample belegt. Das Ganze ist natürlich verstärkt, elektronisch. Und dann steht dem gegenüber das Drumset. Und auch das Drumset ist verstärkt. Und innerhalb des Drumsets gibt es nochmal so einen Klang, den man irgendwie mit einem Megafon, also mit einem Mikrofon eines Megafons nochmal spielt, auf so einem geriebenen Sandblock. Also das sieht man schon, es bauen sich so Schichten auf. Und dann hat sie quasi nochmal eine Schicht draufgesetzt. Ich wiederhole mich so ein bisschen mit den Schichten, aber das ist halt wirklich so ein bisschen das Ding bei ihr, ja. Auch bei anderen Stücken übrigens.
When I heard Dirk saying that about layers, I asked myself, well, is it really my thing? Probably yes. Between 2012 and 2015 I composed 2 bigger cycles, Briefe, letters and Zimmer, rooms, and some extra pieces dealing specifically with layers. The cycles Briefe and Zimmer each consist of several pieces that can be simultaneously performed. For me, it had to do a lot with urban life, with our reality between different worlds, virtuality, but also the basic beauty and conflict of living together or next to each other, sharing a space, knowingly or unknowingly, willingly or unwillingly. Beyond the structure and the special focus with these cycles on layers I mentioned, composing layers is important in many of my pieces. However, layers don't just mean one layer on top of the other and so on. The osmotic process is interesting. The communication between layers, connections, echoes, resonances, exchange, but also interferences, miscommunication, interruption, or destruction are relevant. For me, on the one hand, all of this is part of our human condition. On the other hand, it's like a great polyphony or also heterophony, like a meta counterpoint that somehow makes the composition 3D. I will talk about the 3D thing more later. The different layers need to have a life of their own, independent. As in Baroque counterpoint, the voice or layer must have its own logic, consistency and meaning. That if it's played alone, of course it wouldn't be the same, but it needs to have a kind of consistent path or truth. Layers can be many things to me. Simply and only different musical material. This relates especially to acoustic pieces and touches basic composition techniques and principles of instrumentation, combination of musical material, structures, timbre, register and so on. Again, it should have something distinct to qualify for a layer to me. Of course, layers could be electronics, if electronics are not only adding a color, but being an original entity. This can happen even with 3 effect pedals, for instance. Here is implicated amplification from 2014 for bass clarinet with 3 effect pedals, distortion, octaver and loop. That's quite basic. The electronics build a space for or around the bass clarinet, and the performer's feet have their own music and virtuosity. Listen to a moment with great Laurent Brutin. different media like pictures, video, film. It can be light, scenography, or theatrical gestures, or could be objects or added instruments, but never one layer is just serving the other. Now Mickey Mousing for me. It's much more about musical or non-musical meanings added, and all this is building up something like a 3D sculpture that makes the piece. I mentioned that before. White Eyes Erased, where we started, is a good example for that. It is actually a reduction or distillation from a big ensemble piece with the title White Eyes I wrote in 2014 for 23 musicians in 4 groups. It was written for Ensemble Kollektiv Berlin, and the duo version is dedicated to Ernst Surberg and Roland Neffe from Ensemble Mosaik. So distilled are here 2 instruments from 23. The keyboard has 88 samples, and these samples have different sources: electronically altered samples of John Cage's sonatas and interludes, songs by the band Animal Collective, unrecognizable, self-recorded and alienated prepared piano sounds, as well as synth sounds, sine and square waves, and every sample is kind of a micro composition. Megaphone is part of the drum set for noises and as a hyper-frequented new music symbol, but also having a USB stick with a sound file that needs to be created for each new duo playing the piece. The 2 musicians read fragments of lyrics by the band Animal Collective and a few other quotations like Cage's "Get yourself out of whatever cage you find yourself in." And from all of this, I then create a collage, and this voice collage is played several times through the megaphone during the piece. Photos are attached to the samples and are projected onto 2 screens. Almost every keyboard key controls a photo. It's a photo collection that seems almost random, like scrolling through your phone collection, consisting of some photos I took, mainly walls, but also paintings by my mother, film stills of old films from the 1930s and 40s, Freaks and Meshes of the Afternoon. This is by Maya Deren. Some picture of John Cage looking for mushrooms, and the band Animal Collective, and also the musicians themselves. They could add kind of anonymously some pictures to the collection, and some places some keys just stay black.
Get yourself out of whatever cage. Come on, let's go. Come on, let's go. But I said no, I'd rather not. Said no, I'd rather not step in. I'm on my own. How no one knows what's best for me. I'd like to embrace it. I'd like to embrace it. Have I made this? Or is it that I'm sleeping? Take for me pictures of melodies. On my part, I should be on the streets.
So the different layers have different connections, but also have their singularities, their uniqueness or aspects that point somewhere else. They have their own rhythm. But when composing, above all, I was and I'm always thinking about the sound. Even if I add so many different non-musical aspects and layers, the most important thing, the core and heartbeat of everything, is the music. When I compose, I don't think like, hey, what would be the next layer I use? It happens differently. And there are many facets. Recently, I got the comment that there would exist many interviews and program notes about background of pieces, but that I would rarely talk about how I compose, how I build things, etc. Indeed, I don't like to speak about the process too much. It's not that I want to hide it, but probably because of the pieces often are then seen only through this one lens. Actually, regarding my compositional process, there would be many things I could show if it wasn't thrown away often, such as rhythmical structures, graphic notations for the dramaturgy of pieces, collections of harmonies, or chords in certain progressions. So let's forget about the layers for now, a new lens. I like to have some kind of a Tonsatz, composition or harmony theory. I don't know how to translate Tonsatz actually. For progressing chords, complementary, so that I get modulations that lead to different harmonic spaces. I've studied Renaissance counterpoint a lot when I was younger, and it is still influencing and fascinating to me. Loosely, I like to give myself rules and then don't necessarily follow them, but they are there somehow. Here's some example of chord progressions from my sketchbooks. Harmonies are essential for my work, and I'm also very interested in tuning. The process of tuning itself is very important to me and has played a role in several of my pieces. As in Zimmer for Ensemble Adapter, where the harpist detunes 17 strings as part of the piece, and at the end there's an epilogue where all strings can be retuned. As a child, I used to travel with my music teacher, who was an amazing musician, a recorder player. She had a Baroque trio, and I participated in many of her concerts, playing the recorder myself. These concerts often took place in churches in smaller cities or villages in northern Germany. Getting there and setting up was always a bit stressful. But then the harpsichordist of the trio, who was very old already and a bit, he had a humpback and was a bit awkward, but a lovely person, and great musician. Then he started to tune the harpsichord, and I just loved that moment. It made everything calm and gave me peace. In 2013, I wrote Running Out of Tune for 2 harpsichords. One is in well-tempered tuning, the other in mean tone temperament. It's probably also a tribute to that harpsichordist. Besides these 2 tuning systems, certain notes are detuned while playing. The friction between the tuning systems is beauty to me. I feel that the music itself, the vibrating air, is getting more tactile through these tuning differences. The sounds are approached from different angles, so to speak. Both harpsichords are amplified and there are transducers, exciters attached to the instruments. At a certain point, a sound file is coming out of the instrument via transducer, and then everything is completely getting out of tune. I like the double meaning of tune in English, by the way. The 2 instrumentalists play only inside then, quite wildly actually. There's no return. I like it in music if you somehow, more or less suddenly, reach a completely new space. Here you can listen to some excerpts. The whole piece is about 15 minutes long. Different tuning systems are very fascinating to me. I have studied and worked with and approached several and also tried to invent some. Although through my own history, training and environment, I'm kind of attached to the 12-tone well-tempered system, I think or hope, at least I'm aware and feel the limitations and also the Eurocentrism of the system. And although I'm probably stuck there, I want to open windows. Tuning, microtonality and enriched harmonies are definitely important in my work, and in combination with other factors like instrumentation, sound, timbre, register, to me it has a lot to do with colors. Although I'm not synesthetic, I like to imagine colors in music and to think of a series of chords, for instance, as a progression of colors and shades. And also instruments I sometimes associate with colors or tints. My orchestra piece Drop Drowned from 2017, it was played at the opening concert of Darmstadt Summer Course in 2018, by the way. It dealt with silence, although there's almost no silence in the piece, with water and with colors, or imagined colors. I decided to leave out oboes and trumpets first. The yellowish colors I associated with them I first didn't want to have in my piece. Later, at some point, I thought, well, now some yellow would be nice. I put 3 oboes and 3 trumpets to the back of the audience, or side or balcony, depending on the space. They have 7 short entrances in the piece, always together and always together with an electronic sound file that is kind of blurring the impression, also coming from the back in the best case. So here is a moment where the imagined colors are shifting from silvery light blue to a dark blue, and finally the oboes, trumpets and electronics will come in. So colors are very important to me. A color itself is already composed. If you study color theory, it's really endless. And it's varying in combination with texture and context. My mother was a painter, Elisabeth Naomi Reuter, and growing up between paintings, colors, different material, and of course her paintings and drawings on the walls, this had a huge influence on me. However, how it really shaped and influenced also my compositional thinking, I only realized lately. 7 colors from 2018 for amplified ensemble. Cello, electric bass, prepared piano with sample keyboard and drum set was the first piece I composed after my mother died. I composed 5 movements, all are connected, attackas, so it's one piece, as a musical approach to colors that were important to my mother and had a special meaning. First movement is amber, burnt sienna. Second, raw sienna ochre. Third, sepia. Fourth, carbon black. And the last, 5th, caput mortuum. My mother liked cloudy, raw, broken colors and had developed certain techniques in her drawings by placing hatchings against each other, very, very fine. And she let colors with other colors break, as she called it, put layers upon layers to add depth, to have the illusion of 3D in 2D, even if it was only a level of color or a color field in the background, abstract one. In the end, she often went over the whole sheet of paper with a very hard pencil and imperceptibly put a veil over it, also on watercolors. In her oil paintings, she worked with subtle glazes, shades and tints of a very narrow color palette. 7 colors is a very personal work, but at the same time very strictly conceived and structured. So, as I said, I tried to approach musically some of my mother's favorite colors, but also some of her techniques. Like in the beginning, every piano chord is combined with or broken by a cymbal stroke. The piano is prepared and also has a sample keyboard, bringing in different sound whirls and associations. The cello has a distortion pedal and is that way also connected to the electric bass. And in the last movement, the drummer starts to move microphones above the cymbals to kind of zoom into the sound and show the hidden spectrum. Since then, I became especially interested in layering different textures, colors, and to blur them in order to create depth and sound. In 2020, I wrote Moos, Moss, inspired by the 100 Shades of Green of moss in Saxony, Elbsandsteingebirge. There are like more than 400 species of mosses and lichens. It's really incredible. You should go there if you can. The piece is also about the feeling of walking on moss. This applies especially to the percussionist who is playing mostly with hands and is kind of walking on expression pedals, triggering sounds sent to a thunder sheet and tam-tam, etc. I also try to picture the texture of moss in music. Like, this is of course very subjectively. It can be found in Hoketus-like textures of the strings, for instance. May have political meaning and also social dimensions. In 2019, I did a collaborative work together with artist and choreographer Heinrich Horwitz, with Carola Schaal from Decoder Ensemble and filmmaker David Campesino and his partner Javier Sobrematzas for cinematography, and also Sonja Lena Schmidt from Decoder Ensemble with cello was involved. Red, a music video that can be presented in different ways. Electronic only, the electronic composition with the video, online as an installation or as a live performance in combination with a cellist. In 2015, I had read about the London drummer Kiran Gandhi. For a year, she had been training for the marathon. And on the day of the marathon, her period set. She decided against tampon or similar and ran the marathon. Quite courageous, without hiding the bleeding. Her action met with protest and also approval and triggered many discussions. And the topic is global and has many aspects, of course. It's about stigma, taboo, marginalization, impurity, period poverty, many other things. Yeah, red is about female menstruation as a metaphor for hidden pain. But beyond gender, age, or culture, it is also about shame, ashamedness, about taboo, stigma, what we hide and should acknowledge. And thus red is not only written for or about women, but means much and many more, to raise awareness maybe, and to contribute in a small way to empowerment, hopefully. Now something different. We are used to speak of music as a temporal art, whereas of painting or sculpture, etc., as a spatial art. Of course, music evolves in time and has a certain time frame. A painting is free of a given time frame, but I think you also need time for the perception of a painting. And while music is thought of as Zeitkunst, temporal art, I myself like to think of my own compositions in Zeiträumen, like in time spaces. And there I can go back and forth, and I have this utopia of creating a sonic space that is polyphonic and or heterophonic in a way so it opens up to different directions. I wrote my opera Sacrifice in 2016. The opera is 2 hours long for 5 singers, 3 actors, large orchestra, an ensemble of instrumental soloists, electronics, tape, video, and a silent choir. It was premiered in 2017 at the Opera Halle with the direction of Florian Lutz and the fantastic stage Heterotopia by scenograph Sebastian Hanak. We had this Darmstadt on air conversation you could check out. He overbuilt the whole theater, and in my opera the audience was sitting on the revolving stage, so everything was happening 360 degrees around them or behind, sometimes even above, and the people were really immersed in sound and images. The topic of the opera is radicalization. The librettist Dirk Lauke invented a constellation of characters and context situations. There was a true story of 2 German girls from the region around Halle who decided to go to Syria and join the jihad. This was kind of an inspiration, but there is also as a topic the rise of the right-wing movement, and Dirk also implemented 3 journalists and kind of brought in the questionable role of the media to the opera. The topic of radicalization was and is current, unfortunately. So Sacrifice is a very political work. I won't go more into detail here now, as I would much more time for that. If you're interested, you can just find more info online or just contact me. However, coming back to space and time and music, in Sacrifice I created a very strict form and dramaturgy, and in every act, the opera has 4, I had these orchestral moments. I called them Klangbilder, sound images, long parts for orchestra only. There was some immediacy I tried to create, a nucleus that had everything inside already, like in math or in nature's fractal patterns, and then I gave it time, or rather space, to unfold. Here is the beginning of Sacrifice, the first Klangbild, sound image. It lasts like 8 minutes. I play only a bit for you to get an impression. now about different aspects in my compositional work and interest. Of course, the interests shift over the time. If I'm looking over my work list, I see how certain themes are accompanying my pieces and then vanishing. For a pretty long time, I was, for instance, kind of obsessed with sounding objects. Objects as a connection of a symbol and sound source combined with a gesture on the threshold to music theater. And I like to create situations on stage that are subtly absurd. Personally, I love the absurd. It's so human and contains so much of our life. The tragic, the funny, the awkward, the intimate, the fragile, and also the beautiful. However, music theater is to me the oeuvre where everything, all my interests can come together. Layers, textures, colors, sound worlds, acoustic and electronic, noise, pitch, voices, instruments, objects, images, text, acting, space, architecture, 3D or 4D, multimedia, of course, the concrete and the abstract. And right now I'm writing my next opera, Ophelia, after Shakespeare, but with a focus on Ophelia, as the title says. I think this opera will be completely different from Sacrifice, much more intimate. The most recent thing I've done and can show you a bit is a collaboration with scenograph Sebastian Hanak again and Paul Kirsten from Prefrontal Cortex, aria for soprano and electronic composition as an augmented reality experience. It can be experienced via mobile devices but also seen in a browser 3D, and it will be available as a virtual reality version in the future as well. The singer Tehila Nini Goldstein lends an avatar, her voice and facial expression. The voice is bodiless, only a head, ghostly in an electronic sound world and electronic composition as augmented reality. Questions are raised not only about closeness and distance or authenticity. We get an inkling of an existence in the digital space in which parts of ourselves as data, decoupled from us, lead a life of their own and thus confront us with our transience. There is some interaction possible. Through augmented reality, you can place the singing head wherever you want in your environment, and the voice is programmed as positional audio, so it gets louder as you come closer. But if you get too close, the voice gets distorted, as if saying, "Keep the distance, please." This, as well as the bodilessness, is of course a reaction to the Corona experience, but not only. This work is hybrid and, of course, influenced by the hybridity of our time. You all know this. There are dangers, but also possibilities and wonderful options, as we can now at least meet online and talk and overcome distance. And I'm looking forward to your questions.